My name is Khadija, and I was 24 years old on the day my life was sold. It was August 22nd, 2016, a date that still echoes inside me like a locked door slamming shut. I remember the heat of that afternoon glowing through the palace windows, turning the marble floors into mirrors of gold. Everything looked beautiful, but I felt like I was drowning inside a place everyone else envied. That was the day my father gathered our family in the grand reception hall and announced with perfect calm that I would marry my uncle Khalil. My own father was giving me away to his older brother, a man 20 years my senior, as casually as if he were transferring property from one hand to another. I felt the world tilt beneath me. The fragrance of burning oud in the hall thickened the air until it was hard to breathe. My uncle's eyes met mine heavy, measuring, claiming. I had known that stare before, but never had it looked so final. My aunts began celebrating as though this were an honor. Someone placed a tray of sweets in front of me, and all I could see was my reflection trembling in the silver. In that moment, I truly believed my life had ended. I believed my destiny had been sealed by men who never once asked if I had dreams of my own. But here's the strange thing about reaching the end. Sometimes it's the only place where truth can finally enter. As my father's voice droned on about alliances and family honor, I felt something inside me break, not softly, but like glass shattering under a blow. I didn't know it then, but that shattering would make space for a different story, one I could never have imagined in the world I grew up in. Have you ever felt your life slipping out of your hands while everyone around you insists you should be grateful? Have you ever smiled because it was safer than speaking? That was me, silent, suffocating, and invisible behind gold walls. And yet, from that very place of powerlessness, something unexpected began to unfold. What I thought would be the end of my story became the beginning of my real life. Because in the deepest darkness of that season, someone I had never dared call upon would come for me. Someone who saw me when no one else did. Someone who had been waiting for the moment I was ready to hear him. I didn't know his name yet, not truly, but I would. And when he spoke, everything in my world, my fears, my chains, my destiny would begin to change. I was born into a world people would recognize only from glossy photographs and news headlines, a world of palaces, private guards, and chandeliers heavy enough to crush a person if they ever fell. But what the world never saw was how those same chandeliers cast shadows, long and silent, over the childhoods of girls like me. My earliest memories are a blur of marble floors cool beneath my feet at dawn, the melodic but demanding call to prayer waking me before the sun, and my mother's soft hands adjusting my veil with the precision of someone terrified of making a mistake. I loved her, but even as a child, I sensed the tension in her smile. She moved through our home like someone carrying a fragile vase filled with secrets. Whenever my father entered a room, she would lower her eyes, and every conversation became a performance meant to uphold the family's image. I learned very quickly that women were ornaments in our world, polished, positioned, displayed, but never fully seen. My father was not cruel in the way the world defines cruelty. He provided, protected, and commanded with certainty. But his love felt like a distant star, bright from far away, impossible to touch. He believed obedience was the highest virtue a woman could possess. That belief shaped my life long before I was old enough to understand what freedom meant. By the age of 6, I had memorized large portions of the Quran because that was expected of daughters born into our lineage. I would kneel on cold marble tiles, reciting verses with perfect pronunciation while the palace imam nodded approvingly. Everyone praised me for being devout, disciplined, obedient. No one asked if I was happy. It didn't matter. Happiness was not a requirement for girls like me. As I grew older, the palace walls seemed to grow with me, stretching higher, tightening their grip. They were 20 feet high, topped with razor wire and cameras that never blinked. I used to think they protected us from a dangerous world outside. I didn't know they were also keeping me from a world I had yet to imagine. Whenever my younger brother reached 16, the age when boys were given the right to escort female relatives, he walked freely through those gates while I stayed behind, watching through narrow windows as if the sky belonged more to him than to me. My tutors taught me everything a future wife in our culture was expected to know: how to manage staff, maintain a household, entertain guests with grace, and recite scripture with flawless devotion. They also taught me what not to be: curious, opinionated, ambitious, or too alive. Even my dreams felt like contraband I had to hide under the bed. But the questions started early. Quiet questions. Dangerous questions. Why could my male cousins study abroad while my female cousins prepared for arranged marriages? Why did our family talk about paradise as if it were built for men, with women merely occupying the background? Why did the God I prayed to feel so distant, so unreachable, even though I bowed before him 5 times a day? Sometimes, in the late afternoons, I would wander into our private mosque just to be alone. I loved the way the calligraphy curled across the walls, verses painted in gold that shimmered in the sunlight. That room felt quiet enough for my soul to speak. I didn't have the words for it then, but something inside me longed to be known, not managed, to be loved, not handled, to be valued, not traded. Maria, our Filipino maid, became a small crack in the perfection of my world. She was always gentle, her footsteps soft, her presence almost invisible. But when she thought no one could hear, she would hum songs that didn't sound like anything I knew. One afternoon, when I was 13, I asked her what she was singing. She hesitated, then said quietly, "A song about someone who loves us." I laughed then, dismissing it as superstition. But years later, her words would come back to me like an echo from a future I never expected. My life was a golden script written long before I learned to write my own name. Marriage was not a question, but a destiny. My mother once told me, "A daughter's honor is her family's reputation." She meant it as comfort, but it felt like chains, soft ones, silk ropes tied with love, but ropes nonetheless. Looking back, I think part of me always knew the palace was not a sanctuary. It was a beautiful cage. And even before the day my father sold my future, something in my spirit was already pressing against the bars, searching for a freedom I didn't yet know existed. The weeks after my father announced my engagement felt like watching my own life from behind a thick sheet of glass. Everything looked the same. Our palace still echoed with footsteps on marble. The scent of cardamom still drifted from the kitchen each morning, and the call to prayer still vibrated through the halls like a familiar heartbeat. But inside, something had shifted. I was no longer a daughter. I was a transaction, a decision already stamped and sealed. Every corridor felt narrower, every rule felt heavier, and every polite smile from relatives felt like a reminder that I had no say in my own destiny. My uncle Khalil visited often after the announcement. His presence changed the temperature of a room. Whenever he entered, conversations tightened, laughter faded, and everyone adjusted themselves as though bracing for something invisible. He would sit across from me, observing not with affection, but with assessment. He asked no questions about my dreams or my thoughts. Instead, he asked about my domestic skills, my religious studies, my readiness to serve a household. Each word pressed on my chest like a weight I couldn't lift. His 3 wives accompanied him sometimes. They stood quietly behind him, their faces carefully composed. They reminded me of delicate porcelain, beautiful, flawless, and terribly fragile. The oldest would lower her gaze whenever he spoke, nodding at each command with the obedience of someone who had forgotten how to speak her own desires. The younger 2 lingered at the edges of the room, their eyes tired in a way that frightened me. I used to wonder what their dreams had been before they became part of his world. Now I wondered if they even remembered. Preparations for the engagement ceremony began immediately. Wedding planners arrived each morning carrying binders full of fabrics, color palettes, and gold-threaded patterns. They circled around me, pinning dresses to my body, measuring my shoulders, adjusting my veil. To them, I was a mannequin draped in silk. To my family, I was proof of their honor. To my uncle, I was an acquisition, and to myself, I was fading. One afternoon, during a dress fitting, I caught my reflection in the mirror. A jeweled headpiece glimmered across my forehead, heavy with tradition. The gown flowed around me like water, a perfect image of a royal bride. But the girl inside looked like she was drowning. My hands trembled as the seamstress tightened the waist, and all I could think was how much it resembled a noose, beautiful, delicate, lethal. Every detail of the upcoming ceremony was planned without my input. The color of the roses, the style of the henna, the guest list of hundreds. My future was being crafted meticulously by people who believed I should be grateful for it. And because gratitude was expected, I learned to perform it. I smiled when they spoke of blessings. I nodded when they mentioned prosperity. But inside, my soul curled into itself like a wounded animal, hiding from a world that refused to see it. The restrictions tightened as the wedding approached. My outings were monitored. My phone was taken. Even conversations with my cousins were watched closely. My father insisted it was for my protection, but it felt like a prelude to ownership. One night, he called me into his study. The incense was heavy, and religious texts lay open on his desk. He spoke of duty, of family honor, of obedience. A woman's strength, he said, is in her submission. His voice was firm, but not angry, just certain, as if this truth had been etched into him since birth. I realized then that he believed he was doing what was right. Somehow, that made it hurt more. My attempts to reason with him were dismissed with gentle but unmovable authority. "You will learn to love him," he said. "All women do," but I had seen enough to know that wasn't true. Love cannot grow in captivity. It either suffocates or it disappears entirely. The engagement ceremony arrived like a storm I was forced to walk straight into. Music filled the palace. Women painted my hands with henna. Relatives kissed my cheeks and congratulated my father. The jewelry placed on my wrists clinked softly, but each piece felt like a shackle locking into place. When my uncle presented the engagement gift, a set of heavy gold bracelets carved with his family emblem, I felt the last piece of my freedom slip away. As the festivities went on, my mind drifted in and out. I watched my family celebrate, and for a moment, I wondered if they truly believed this was good. Did they not see the fear in my eyes? Or had they learned, long before I was born, not to look too closely at a woman's suffering? Late that night, after the guests had left, I sat alone in my room. My wrists were sore from the weight of the gold. My head throbbed from the tightness of the veil. I unpinned the jewels, one by one, until my hair fell over my shoulders in a cascade. As each piece dropped onto the floor, I felt my breath returning in small gasps. But then another thought came, quiet and crushing. This was only the beginning. The wedding was 2 months away, and every day until then would be another step toward a life I didn't choose. Have you ever felt trapped in a future you didn't want? Have you ever felt the walls closing in long before you took the first step inside them? That was my reality. And beneath all the gold and ceremony, a deeper kind of darkness began to settle inside me, one that whispered that escape was impossible, and that my voice, my heart, my life no longer belonged to me. The weeks after the engagement ceremony felt like a slow-motion descent into a place without air. Each day dissolved into the next dress fittings, family meetings, religious lectures about the obedience of wives. Everyone spoke about my upcoming marriage as if it were a celebration, but for me it was a countdown, ticking softly somewhere behind every conversation. November 18th, the day I would become my uncle's fourth wife, stood in my mind like a cliff edge growing closer with every breath I took. One afternoon in early October, I stood on a platform at the seamstress's studio, surrounded by mirrors on three sides. The wedding dress, handcrafted, imported, meticulously fitted, flowed around my body like a cloud. It should have been beautiful. Women dreamed of gowns like this their whole lives. But when the seamstress tightened the corset and the fabric pressed against my ribs, something inside me buckled. My heartbeat accelerated. The room seemed to tilt, the soft gold lighting suddenly too sharp. My own reflection stared back at me, pale and trembling, as though I were watching a stranger vanish behind layers of silk. "Breathe, Habibti," the seamstress murmured. But breathing felt impossible. My lungs refused to open. Tears filled my eyes, uninvited, unwelcome. I bit my lip to stop them, but one slipped free, sliding down my cheek onto the white bodice. The seamstress froze. She knew what tears meant. Tears meant weakness. Tears meant doubt. And there was no room for either in the life that had been chosen for me. I made it back to my room before the sobbing began. Not loud, not dramatic, just silent, shaking gasps that scraped my throat raw. I buried my face in my pillow so no guard or servant would hear. I didn't want witnesses. I didn't want comfort. I just wanted the world to stop spinning long enough for me to understand how I had become trapped in a story I never chose. That night, the palace was unusually quiet. My family gathered for evening prayer, but I stayed in my room with the excuse of a headache. I sat on the cold floor, the prayer rug spread beneath my knees. I lifted my hands out of habit, the words I had recited for years hovering on my tongue. But when I opened my mouth, nothing came out. For the first time in my life, I couldn't pray. It wasn't rebellion, it was emptiness. "Allah," I whispered finally, my voice cracking. "Please, please help me." The silence that followed was thicker than the darkness. I waited until my legs ached and my throat burned. Nothing. No comfort. No warmth. Only the echo of my own desperation bouncing back at me. Later that night, I stepped onto the balcony outside my room. The Riyadh sky stretched endlessly above me, a dark velvet canvas lit by distant stars. The air was warm, still, deceptively peaceful. I gripped the railing with both hands, my stomach hollow. Below me, the courtyard spread like a quiet abyss. Too quiet. A single thought rose in my mind, uninvited, unthinkable. If I jumped, it would all be over. No forced marriage, no more being traded, no more pretending. Just silence, just freedom. The idea terrified me. Not because I feared death, but because I no longer feared living enough to cling to it. I sank to my knees right there on the balcony floor, the stone burning against my skin. "God, if you are real," I whispered, trembling. "Please, where are you? Why don't you see me? Why don't you stop this?" My voice cracked again, breaking open like something fragile I could no longer protect. I pressed my forehead to the ground, sobbing, not with anger but with exhaustion, years of holding myself together unraveling in a single moment. Have you ever reached a point where your soul feels too heavy to carry? Where you look at your own reflection and don't recognize the person staring back? That was me kneeling on a balcony in the middle of the night, begging a silent sky to answer. I didn't know it then, but sometimes silence is not absence. Sometimes it's the breath before a miracle. And on that night of breaking my lowest, darkest moment, something in the unseen world began to shift. I couldn't feel it yet, but heaven was already moving toward me. In the days after that night on the balcony, Something inside me felt bruised in a way I couldn't explain. I went through each obligation like a ghost wearing my body. My family saw me reading scripture, practicing my recitations, attending lessons, but none of it felt real anymore. The words I had spoken thousands of times floated in front of me like smoke, visible, familiar, but impossible to hold. I kept waiting for the heaviness to lift, for clarity to return, but an emptiness followed me everywhere, like a shadow that had finally decided to step into the light. It was during this numbness that a memory surfaced, one I hadn't thought about in years. Maria, her quiet singing, the way she whispered prayers under her breath when she thought no one could hear. I remembered confronting her once when I was 15, fueled by youthful certainty and religious pride. I told her Jesus was only a prophet and that she was misguided for praying to him. She didn't argue. She simply looked at me with a softness I didn't understand then and said, "My Jesus loves women. He sees us as daughters, not property." I had dismissed her words at the time, but now they returned with startling clarity, as if someone were gently knocking on a door I had bolted shut. One night, unable to sleep, I found myself whispering into the darkness, "Jesus, if you are real." The name felt forbidden on my tongue, like stepping barefoot into fire. My heart pounded in my chest. I expected lightning, punishment, a voice rebuking me. But nothing happened, nothing except a strange and quiet stillness that settled over me. It wasn't peace exactly, more like a pause, a breath held by someone unseen. The next morning, something even stranger happened. Maria entered my room to change the linens. She worked silently as always, but when she finished, she lingered for a moment, something she never did. She adjusted the pillows, then slipped a small wrapped bundle beneath the edge of my mattress so discreetly I almost missed it. Her eyes met mine for half a second. They were filled with a mix of fear and compassion, as if she were risking something enormous. Then she bowed her head and left the room. I waited until the hallway was silent before pulling the small bundle into my lap. My fingers trembled as I unwrapped it. Inside was a tiny book, thin, worn, bound in faded leather, a Bible in Arabic. My breath caught in my throat. Having it in my possession could mean imprisonment, or worse. My family would never forgive such a betrayal. But when I opened it, the room seemed to exhale around me. The paper was thin, the words delicate. I flipped through until my eyes landed on a story I vaguely remembered hearing about but never reading myself about. A woman caught in adultery, dragged before religious leaders who wanted her stoned. I expected judgment, condemnation, but instead, I read about a man kneeling beside her in the dust, shielding her from the stones, challenging those who wanted to destroy her. "Let the one who is without sin cast the first stone." And one by one, they walked away. I felt something crack open inside me, something tender and unfamiliar. Who was this man? This Jesus? How could someone with such authority choose compassion instead of condemnation? Why did his words feel like water on the driest parts of my soul? That night, I hid the Bible beneath my pillow and whispered again, "Jesus, if that is who you are, I need you." It felt dangerous, reckless, and strangely hopeful. The palace around me remained the same, the locked doors, the guarded halls, the expectations closing in, but something small and bright had taken root inside me. A seed, a whisper, a possibility. I didn't know yet that this small whisper would soon become a voice that would change everything. I didn't know that heaven had already begun moving toward me. In the days that followed, I kept the little Arabic Bible hidden beneath my pillow like a secret heartbeat. Every night, when the palace grew quiet and the guards rotated shifts, I would pull it out and let the pages whisper to me. I read slowly, terrified that someone would hear the turning paper, yet unable to stop. Each story felt like a window opening inside a room I had thought was sealed shut. But the more I read, the more I felt a strange sensation building in me, like someone was pulling gently at the corners of my soul, asking to be let in. Then came the night that changed everything. It was 2 days after my uncle's sudden death. The palace was wrapped in mourning, though beneath the grief I sensed a quiet relief, especially from his wives. That evening, after hours spent pretending to be the dutiful would-be bride in front of relatives offering condolences, I slipped back into my room exhausted. My head pounded. My heart felt heavy. I curled beneath my blankets with the Bible pressed against my chest, whispering a prayer I barely understood. Jesus, if you can hear me, please don't leave me alone. Sometime past midnight, I drifted into a restless sleep. I wasn't dreaming, at least not in the way dreams usually come. This felt different. The air in my room grew warm, almost alive, as if someone had lit a flame nearby. And then I opened my eyes. My room was filled with light. Not a harsh, blinding light this was, soft, golden, warm, pulsing gently like sunlight filtered through water. It didn't come from the chandelier. It didn't come from the hallway. It was everywhere, floating, breathing, alive. I pushed myself up slowly, trembling. My breath caught in my throat as the light gathered into a shape, a silhouette at first, and then unmistakably a man. Not a ghost, not a shadow, a presence. He stood near the foot of my bed, and though fear should have seized me, it didn't. Instead, a deep, inexplicable peace washed over me, so profound it made my eyes sting with tears. He looked Middle Eastern skin, the color of sand warmed by sun, dark hair touching his shoulders, and eyes that seemed to hold galaxies of compassion. And in those eyes, I felt known, completely, entirely, painfully known. When he spoke, his voice was like music wrapped in truth, gentle yet carrying a weight that made the very air in the room respond. Khadija, he said, my name sounding different on his tongue. My daughter. My breath broke. I had never heard those words spoken like that, without ownership, without expectation, without condition. Just love. Pure, unfiltered love. You were never meant to be someone's property, he continued. You were never invisible to me. I glanced down at his hands. That was when I saw the marks. Circular, healed, but unmistakable. Wounds where nails had once been. My heart thundered. Tears blurred my vision. Who are you? I whispered, though deep down, some part of me already knew. He stepped closer, and the light followed him like it adored him. I am the one you called, he said softly, the one who heard your cry on the balcony, the one who has been with you since the beginning. My lips trembled. Jesus! The moment I said his name, something broke open inside me, a dam I didn't know I had been holding back. Years of silence, years of fear, years of longing collapsed into a single sob. He reached out, his hand. I don't know how I knew, but I understood that if I placed my hand in his, everything would change. So I did. And the moment my skin touched his palm, warmth surged through me, not physical warmth alone, but something deeper, something that felt like truth entering marrow. I paid the price for your freedom, he said. Not just from this marriage, but from every chain that has ever bound your heart. My knees gave out, and I fell onto the floor beside my bed, tears soaking the rug. Every shame, every fear, every unanswered question poured out of me like water breaking from a cracked vessel. Why me? I whispered. Why would you come for me? He knelt beside me. Because I love you, he said simply. And because you asked. I don't know how long the moment lasted. It felt like time paused, suspended between heaven and earth. When I finally looked up again, the light had begun to fade. His figure softened like sunlight dissolving into dawn. "Do not be afraid," he said one last time. "I am with you." Then the room dimmed. The warmth lingered like a hand on my heart. I was alone, but not truly. Not anymore. I pressed my hands to my face, trembling. Something irreversible had happened. Something holy. My life, my entire understanding of God, destiny, and identity had just shifted in a single encounter. I didn't know what the future would hold, but I knew this. I was no longer walking through it alone. After that night, the world looked the same, yet nothing felt the same. The palace walls still rose high around me. Guards still walked their predictable paths, and my family still moved through each day with the quiet confidence of people who believed everything was under control. But they didn't know what had happened in my room. They didn't know that the girl they were trying to mold into obedience had already placed her hand in the scarred palm of someone far greater than them. I woke each morning feeling a strange strength in my chest, like a hidden flame that would not go out no matter how tightly fear tried to smother it. I began to pray to Jesus in the only places I could safely hide behind locked bathroom doors, in the silence of late nights, or beneath my blankets with the Bible close to my heart. My prayers weren't long or poetic. They were whispers, pleas, conversations with someone who felt closer than breath. "Help me," I would say. "Show me what to do." And somehow, each day brought a small sign, nothing dramatic, yet unmistakably guided. A guard turning left instead of right. A conversation delayed long enough for me to slip away. A relative who forgot to check my room at an hour they usually did. The small, unlikely things that felt like invisible hands rearranging my path. Then the pressure returned. My father informed me that since the period of mourning had passed, it was time to resume discussions about my future. He spoke of a distant cousin Omar, a man with a strict reputation and a heavy devotion to tradition. The way he described him made my stomach tighten. It was happening again. Another man, another arrangement, another trap. That night, I fell to my knees on the rug and whispered into the darkness, "Jesus, what do I do? I can't go through this again." There was no vision this time, no overwhelming light, only a quiet clarity that settled inside me. You must leave. The idea terrified me more than any marriage proposal ever had. Leave Saudi Arabia, leave my family, leave everything I had ever known. Yet the clarity stayed. It stayed through the night, through the morning, and through every hour that followed until I could no longer pretend not to hear it. Maria noticed my fear long before anyone else did. One afternoon, while she folded laundry in my room, she placed a gentle hand on my shoulder and whispered, "Child, you cannot stay here." Her eyes were full of the same quiet courage I had seen months before. The day she slipped the Bible under my mattress. There are people, believers, who can help. My breath caught. She was risking everything just by saying it, but fear did not stop her. "God opened a door for you once," she said softly. "He will open another." She introduced me secretly to 2 other Christian staff in the palace, people I had passed in hallways countless times without knowing they carried the same hidden faith. Together, in storage rooms and service corridors, we formed a tiny underground church. It was the first time I prayed openly to Jesus with others. We whispered hymns so quietly they sounded like breaths. We held hands and asked for guidance. We prayed for protection. And in those secret gatherings, I learned the meaning of family in a way my blood relatives had never taught me. The plan unfolded slowly, carefully, as if guided by invisible hands. Maria explained that many wealthy Saudi families allowed their daughters to pursue advanced Islamic studies in neighboring countries, a prestigious credential that improved marriage prospects. Jordan was one of the safest places for such programs. She suggested that I request a year-long course in Amman, one that would appear entirely religious and culturally appropriate. The idea was brilliant in its simplicity. It gave me a legitimate reason to leave the country, and once I crossed the border, I would be out of my family's reach. The timing was crucial. My father had recently accepted a business assignment requiring extensive travel, making him unusually distracted. My mother, still grieving the collapse of my arranged marriage to my uncle, was desperate to restore the family's honor and saw the suggestion of further religious education as a solution. For weeks, I prayed and waited, asking Jesus to orchestrate what I could not control. And one afternoon in late May 2017, my father called me to his study and told me he had approved my request. I nearly collapsed from relief. The weeks leading up to my departure felt surreal. Outwardly, I packed modest clothes, study materials, and prayer rugs. Inwardly, I prepared to leave my entire life behind. I hid the Bible carefully within a secret pocket sewn into the lining of my suitcase. My hands trembled as I stitched it in place. I knew that if anyone found it, the consequences would be dire, both for me and for those who helped me. But the fear didn't stop me. Jesus had already placed courage where despair once lived. From the 15th of June 2017 arrived with blistering summer heat. My parents accompanied me to the airport, unaware that this goodbye would stretch far longer than they could imagine. My mother wept as she adjusted my veil one last time. My father held my passport with the proud sternness of a man convinced he was shaping my destiny. They kissed my forehead. They prayed for my purity, my devotion, my obedience. I wanted to tell them I loved them. I wanted to say goodbye properly, but my throat ached too tightly to speak. As I walked through the departure gate, something inside me shifted. For the first time in my life, I was stepping into a future that belonged to me and not to the expectations of others. I boarded the plane with trembling hands, clutching the Bible hidden beneath the lining of my suitcase like a lifeline. When the wheels left the ground, tears spilled down my cheeks. Not from fear, though fear was there, but from relief so deep it shook me. I looked out the window as Saudi Arabia shrank beneath the clouds. Jesus, I whispered, I'm yours. Lead me. And he did. From the moment I landed in Jordan, I felt a presence beside me that never left. The air smelled different. The sky looked wider. And somewhere inside my heart, a quiet voice whispered, you are free now. But I didn't yet understand how much that freedom would cost or how much beauty it would bring. When I stepped out of Queen Alia International Airport in Amman, it felt as if the air itself was different, lighter, cooler, filled with a kind of freedom I had never tasted before. My scarf fluttered in the wind, and for a moment I simply stood there, letting the unfamiliar sounds wash over me. Taxi drivers calling out destinations, families reuniting with relieved laughter, children tugging at their parents' sleeves, no guards, no surveillance, no one watching my every movement. It was overwhelming in the most unexpected way. For someone who had lived her entire life behind walls, even the open sky felt like a miracle. I made my way to a small chapel Maria had told me about, located just a short drive from the airport. My hands trembled as I pushed open its wooden door. Inside, soft music played a simple worship melody sung in Arabic and English. Men and women prayed together, their voices rising like gentle waves. Children laughed quietly in the back row. There were no strict lines separating genders, no heavily monitored silence. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had entered a place where souls mattered more than roles. A pastor approached me after the service. His name was Father Mikhail, and his eyes held the same compassion I had seen in the vision of Jesus. I told him everything carefully, fearfully, the truth spilling out of me in pieces. He listened without interrupting, without judgment, without fear. When I finished, he placed a hand over his heart and said, "My daughter, you are safe. God himself led you here." For the first time since boarding the plane, I let my shoulders relax. Over the next week, the church community helped me find temporary housing in a Christian guest home for women. They gave me clothing, food, a phone, and most precious of all, they gave me time. Time to breathe, time to pray, time to begin healing from a lifetime of being told that my identity belonged to others. At night, I would sit on the balcony of the guest home, look up at the Jordanian sky, and whisper, "Jesus, thank you." And every time I said his name, I felt something inside me settle into place, like a stone finally finding its home in the riverbed. But healing rarely comes without cost. 2 weeks after I arrived in Jordan, my mother called the Islamic academy where my family believed I was studying. When they reported that I had never checked in, everything unraveled. My phone began ringing nonstop, dozens of missed calls, messages filled with panic, anger, disbelief. I ignored them for hours, afraid to face the consequences of my choice. But eventually, I picked up. My father's voice was ice. My mother's voice was fire. My brother's voice was sharp with betrayal. They demanded I return immediately. They threatened, they pleaded, they called it rebellion, sin, dishonor. And then, when I refused, they cut me off completely. "You are no longer our daughter," my father said before hanging up. The line went dead. Something inside me shattered even though I knew this moment might come. It was one thing to choose freedom. It was another to accept the cost of it. That night, I cried until my throat burned. Not because I regretted my decision, but because losing a family, even a controlling, restrictive one, feels like losing a piece of your own body. I felt guilt, I felt grief, I felt relief, I felt everything at once, and it left me shaking. But in the middle of that storm of emotion, I suddenly felt the same warmth I had felt the night Jesus appeared in my room, a quiet, steady presence wrapping around me like a cloak. "You are mine," his voice whispered in my memory. "You are not alone." Those words became the anchor of my healing. Slowly, I began rebuilding my life. The church helped me apply for asylum. I enrolled in English classes, then counseling, then online Christian studies. I learned how to navigate a world where I could speak without seeking permission. I learned how to choose my own clothes, how to make friends, how to laugh without fear. The simplest freedoms felt like small miracles. Walking outside alone, reading a book in a cafe, praying without hiding. I joined a ministry for women escaping abusive situations. Many were refugees. Many were former Muslims carrying wounds just like mine. When I shared my testimony for the first time, my voice trembled. But afterward, a young woman came up to me with tears in her eyes and whispered, "If Jesus saved you, maybe he can save me too." And in that moment, I understood my suffering had become a bridge. My story was no longer just about me. It was about what God could do through me. 2 years later, during a church outreach event, I met David, a Christian humanitarian worker with gentle eyes and a quiet strength. He did not try to possess me. He did not try to silence me. He listened. He prayed with me. He respected the wounds I carried and walked with me as Jesus healed them one by one. When he proposed, I cried not from fear, but from a freedom so deep it felt like sunlight filling my lungs. Our wedding was simple, beautiful, filled with worship. As I walked down the aisle in a dress I chose, toward a man I chose, I felt Jesus smiling over every step. Today, I am a mother of 2 children who are growing up in a home filled with laughter, faith, and freedom. My daughter will never be traded for an alliance. My son will grow up learning that women are equals, not property. And I live every day as a woman redeemed, restored, and rewritten by the love of Jesus Christ. So let me ask you something. Yes, you, the one listening right now, have you ever felt trapped in a life you didn't choose? Have you ever believed that your story was too broken, too painful, or too complicated for God to redeem? If Jesus could find me, a frightened girl hidden inside a palace of gold, he can find you wherever you are. You are not invisible. You are not forgotten. You are loved more deeply than you know. If you need prayer, if you're searching, or if you just need someone to stand with you, leave a comment below. I would be honored to pray for you. And don't forget to subscribe to hear more testimonies of what Jesus is doing around the world. Because your story isn't finished. And the one who saved me is reaching for you too.